Hi, my name is Brandon Lawson. I'd like to perform my rap, please.
Soft words, a slur on every S. A black boy, 9, in a shirt his grandma sewed. The talent judges giggled. Vanessa Ashford leaned into her mic.
Oh, sweetheart, they let your kind on this stage? This isn't a food stamp audition.
Trevor Hollis smirked.
That Lisp is something. Did Grandmama drag you off the corner to make rent?
Whitney Brooks covered her mouth.
Vanessa, you can't, but bless his little heart.
500 people roared. Phones out. Row 6 live streamed. Somebody screamed,
"Go back to the projects!"
Nobody stood up. Backstage, his grandma, 71, mid-chemo, all he had left, gripped her chair until her knuckles went white. The black boy at the mic, the boy they giggled at for his tongue, touched the cassette in his pocket and waited. None knew his first 16 bars were 90 seconds away. 90 seconds to leave every one of them speechless. 6 months before the lights of Spotlight Nation found him, Brandon Lawson lived in a 2-bedroom walk-up on the 2nd floor of a tired building on Federal Street in Camden, New Jersey. The hallway smelled like fried onions and old paint. The radiator banged at night like somebody was trapped inside it. The mailbox downstairs had the name Lawson written in Sharpie on a strip of masking tape, because the original label had peeled off years ago and nobody had bothered to replace it. Inside that apartment, a 71-year-old woman named Hattie Lawson raised her grandson on Social Security, 2 part-time cleaning jobs, and the kind of stubborn love that does not announce itself. She had been raising him since he was 5. That was the year his mother, Denise, died of an overdose in a bathroom 3 blocks away. Brandon barely remembered the day, only the smell of his grandmother's coat when she came to get him from the kitchen of a neighbor lady, and the way she held him in the back seat of a cab and did not let go, even when the driver said they had arrived. His father had never been on the birth certificate. Hattie was all he had. Brandon was born with a partial tongue tie. The pediatric clinic on Mickle Boulevard had quoted $4,200 for the corrective surgery when he was 6. Hattie had folded that paper 4 times and put it in the drawer with the bills she paid only when the red letters came. The lisp stayed. So did the laughter. In kindergarten, the other kids called him the boy who hisses. In 2nd grade, a substitute teacher asked him to read the morning announcement and stopped him halfway through to say gently, in front of everyone, that maybe somebody else should finish. In 4th grade, Mrs. Donovan, his classroom teacher, told him during a vocabulary lesson, "Brandon, sweetie, just use your inside voice, because the outside one is a little hard on the ears." The class laughed. Brandon sat down. He did not cry. He had already learned by then that crying made it worse. What nobody at school knew was that under his mattress, inside a manila folder, were 3 composition notebooks filled top to bottom with rap lyrics. Brandon listened to MF Doom and Eminem and Kendrick on a pair of cracked over-ear headphones that had once belonged to his mother. He didn't analyze rhyme schemes. He didn't know what a syllable density chart was. He just felt it. He felt the way certain words landed on the snare. He felt the way his own lisp, the very thing his teachers told him to swallow, could turn the letter S into a hi-hat. He had spent 2 years writing in the margins of his notebooks one quiet truth. The sound the world told him to hide was the same sound that made his bars hit different. In a top drawer next to his bed sat a small black cassette recorder. His mother had left it for him before she died. Inside it was a single tape. On the tape was her voice, 28 years old, reading a poem she had written for him. A poem about a tongue that wouldn't sit still and a God who didn't make mistakes. He played it every night before he slept. In the kitchen, on the counter, the bills piled higher every week. Hattie had been diagnosed in March with stage 3 breast cancer. Chemo on Tuesdays at Cooper University Hospital. A magnet shaped like Jesus held down the medical statements. She didn't tell Brandon when she had a bad day. He saw it in her cup of tea, the one she could no longer finish, sitting cold on the counter at 4 in the afternoon. When the music teacher, Mrs. Hadley, quietly submitted Brandon's name for the Spotlight Nation Junior Division audition, she didn't tell Hattie either. The call came on a Thursday. Hattie sat down on the kitchen chair and didn't speak for a full minute. Brandon took her hand. "Grandma," he said, "I want to rap for Mama." Hattie cried then, just once. She nodded. The night before the audition, she sat on the edge of his bed, buttoned his collar, pressed the cassette into his palm, and said, "Baby, the world's gonna laugh first. You make sure your laugh comes last." The Pennsylvania Convention Center on the morning of the audition smelled like coffee and adrenaline. The line of children with their parents wrapped around the block twice. Hattie sat on a folding chair near the entrance, her IV port hidden under a wool shawl, an oxygen tank Brandon didn't know she had brought tucked beside her purse. She kept her face calm. Inside in the holding area, Brandon met a young woman at the soundboard named Tasha Williams. She was 24, black, with a single braid down her back and a clipboard that had stickers on it. When she came over to clip the lavalier microphone to his shirt, she did not bend at the waist to look down at him. She crouched. She sat all the way down on her heels until her eyes were level with his. "What you got for me today, little man?" Brandon told her, soft, careful. She listened to the way his S came out. She did not react. She just smiled. "Brandon," she said, "I'm going to save a backup of your raw audio on this USB right here, just in case the broadcast feed glitches. Okay?" She winked. He didn't understand the wink. He nodded anyway. Something in his chest unknotted half an inch. 15 minutes before showtime, the segment coordinator, a man named Ellis Granger, gathered the 3 judges in a small green room behind the stage. He pulled up a tablet. He showed them slot 4. He said the words, "comedy block." He said the kid's name. He laughed first, to give them permission. Vanessa Ashford laughed second. Trevor Hollis hesitated for a half-second, looked at his contract on the table, 3 months from renewal, and laughed third. Whitney Brooks, 28 episodes into a deal she could not afford to lose, smiled and nodded. Ellis said, "Don't pretend to be neutral. The audience wants reactions. Just react." All 3 signed off without saying so. In the corridor between the green room and the stage door, Brandon stood with his back to the wall, listening through a thin partition. He heard his name. He heard the word comedy. He heard 3 different laughs. He understood then that when he walked out under those lights, no one in the building was on his side. He was going to walk out alone. He almost asked to go home. He turned, took 2 steps back toward the holding area, and stopped. His grandmother was sitting there. He could not let her see him quit. He could not let her see him do anything except what they had come for. He walked the long way around, past the catering tables, past the production assistants checking their headsets, and he found her in the corner. She looked up and saw his face the way only a grandmother sees a face. She did not ask what was wrong. She just opened her purse, took out the cassette recorder, and held it out to him. "Listen to your mama one time, baby," she said. "Then you decide. I'll be right here, whatever you choose." Brandon sat down on the floor at her feet the way he used to when he was 4 years old. He put the headphones in. He pressed play. His mother's voice, 28 years old, came through the small speakers, soft and clear. She was reading the poem she had written for him in a notebook the year before she died. "To my baby boy with the tongue that won't sit still. The world is going to tell you to be quiet, but God didn't give you a voice to be quiet with. God gave you a voice because somebody, somewhere, is waiting to hear it. Don't make it small for them, baby. Make it loud. Make it yours." Mama loves you, Brandon. Always. Even when I'm not there. The tape clicked to silence. He sat there for 10 more seconds. He did not cry. He took the headphones out of his ears. He looked up at his grandmother. He said, "Grandma, I'm gonna rap. For Mama." Hattie nodded once. She put her hand on his cheek. "Then you go on now, baby." He stood up. He walked toward the stage door, past the production assistants, past Tasha Williams at the soundboard. Tasha caught his eye for half a second as he passed. He gave her one tiny nod. She gave him one back. In his pocket, the small black cassette recorder pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. He stepped out into the lights. The applause that greeted him was the polite kind, the kind audiences give to anyone who walks out under bright lights. Brandon walked to the white tape mark on the floor. He was small. The microphone stand had been set for an adult, and a stagehand jogged out to lower it. The audience laughed at that too. Brandon waited. He did not flinch. Vanessa Ashford did not even wait for the stagehand to leave. She leaned forward, one elbow on the judge's desk, and the words came out of her mouth slow and clear and live. "Sweetheart, did somebody's mama lose you on the way to the food stamp office? Because, honey, this stage isn't for kids like you." The audience laughed. 500 adults laughed at a 9-year-old child. Trevor Hollis lifted his mic, smirked, and said, "That lisp is something. Did Grandmama drag you off the corner to make rent? 'Cause we can't understand a thing." Whitney Brooks covered her mouth and leaned to Vanessa and said into a microphone that caught everything, "Vanessa, you can't, but God bless his little heart." Phones came out. Row 6 live-streamed. Somebody yelled, "Go back to the projects, little man!" Producers in the booth high-fived. Backstage, Hattie Lawson, 71 years old, halfway through chemo, the only family he had left, gripped the rail of her folding chair until her knuckles went white. Brandon did not look at them. He looked down at the soundboard. Tasha Williams looked back at him. She gave him one tiny nod. The beat dropped. A slow boom-bap, a piano sample lifted from a 1973 gospel record his grandmother used to play in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. The kick hit like a heartbeat. Brandon raised the mic. "My name is Brandon. I'm 9 years old. Mama's in heaven, Grandma's getting old. They say my tongue don't work right, but it's the only one I got tonight." The lisp came through on every S, and every S landed exactly on the snare. The hiss was the percussion. The thing they had been laughing at 10 seconds ago was now the rhythm. In the front row, a 7-year-old boy named Mason, the kid who had been giggling loudest before the beat started, stopped giggling. His mother stopped next. A wave of silence rolled from the front of the room toward the back, a wave nobody could see but everybody could feel. Because human laughter is contagious, and so is human astonishment. By second 16, the audience had gone quiet. The judges hadn't noticed yet. "Denise Lawson, June 15. I was 5 years old, didn't know what dyin' mean. Now I'm 9, and Grandma's sick. I came up here 'cause she said, go quick." Whitney Brooks was the first one on the judges' panel to break. Her smile was still on her face from the last laugh, frozen there like a photograph somebody forgot to take down. By second 30, her hand was over her mouth and the smile was gone, and her eyes were wet. She did not say a word. "Grandma's got a magnet shaped like Jesus. On the bills, she can't keep up. Chemo Tuesday, she don't tell me, but I see it in her cup." Trevor Hollis lowered his pen. He had been an honest-to-God jazz musician once, before the television money found him, and he was the only one at that table who could hear in real time what was actually happening to him. The internal rhyme, the lisp on the snare, the way the kid was breathing with the beat instead of against it. He opened his mouth, looked at Vanessa, started to say something, and could not find the sound. His mouth closed. Then it opened again. Then it stayed open. Teacher said use inside voice, 'cause my outside voice ain't nice. But God gave me this voice on purpose, and I'ma use it twice. Vanessa Ashford had a comeback ready. She had been doing this for 22 years. She always had a comeback. Sweetie, this isn't a sob story contest. That was the line she had prepared in her head. Now she opened her mouth to deliver it, and her mic was hot. And 14 million people heard the syllable, half a breath, then nothing. Her lips moved. No sound came out. She raised her hand to signal cut to the booth. The booth did not cut. Down at the soundboard, Tasha Williams had quietly disconnected the talkback channel. Vanessa lowered her hand. The kid on stage kept going. Tell the man with the silver pen, a flaw can flip into a flow. Mama wrote it in her book. She just didn't get to know. In the upper balcony, in seat C14, a man in his 50s sat very still, his hand over his mouth. Brandon's eyes flicked up there for half a second. The look on his face changed, and then changed back. He kept rapping. You laughed at my tongue before you ever heard my heart. I came in fluent, in the only language Mama left for art. He stopped. The beat ran out under him. There was a sound in that studio that no one who was there has ever been able to describe. It was the absence of every sound a room is supposed to have. No coughs, no shifting, no phones, no breath. 500 people stopped breathing at the same time, and 3 judges stopped breathing with them. The camera moved slowly down the judges' table. Trevor Hollis, mouth open, both hands flat on the desk, not moving. Whitney Brooks, mouth open, one hand over her mouth, tears tracking clean lines down her face. Vanessa Ashford, mouth open, no tears, no expression at all, just empty. The first time in 22 years of television that her face had nothing on it. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. A black woman in row 6 stood up. She started clapping, slow at first. The man next to her stood. The row stood. The next row stood. By the 7th second, the entire studio was on its feet. 500 people, the same 500 who had been laughing 70 seconds earlier, and 7-year-old Mason was standing on his chair, clapping like his hands were going to come off. Jordan Pierce, the host, walked out from the wings to call for the vote. He looked at the judges. The judges did not move. Trevor, Jordan said. Trevor lifted his finger. He pressed yes. He did not say a word. Whitney? Whitney pressed yes. She did not say a word either. Vanessa? She looked down at the button. She looked up at Brandon. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. Nothing came out. She pressed yes. 3-0. Not one of them spoke. Brandon touched the cassette in his pocket. He looked toward the wings where Hattie was standing now, one hand on the curtain, one trembling thumb raised. He nodded to her. He walked off the stage. The sun came up the next morning on a country that could not stop watching one 90-second clip. By 6 a.m. Eastern, the live recording of Brandon Lawson's first audition had been viewed 8 million times. By 7, the cable morning shows were running it on loop. By 8, Trevor Hollis sat down at his kitchen table in Connecticut, opened the Twitter app on his phone, and typed for the first time in his life from a place that was not his publicist's office. I owe Brandon Lawson more than an apology, he wrote. I owe him my vote and my voice. I laughed at him last night because I was told to. I will not laugh again. He posted it. Then he sat at the table for 10 minutes and did not move. In Brooklyn, Whitney Brooks was already typing. Hers was longer. She wrote about a phrase, 3 words, bless his heart, and how those 3 words had once been spoken to her by a music executive in 2008, and how she had spent her whole career swallowing them, and how last night at that judge's table, she had spoken them out loud about a 9-year-old child without even realizing she was repeating the line that had been used to hurt her. I owe him an apology, she wrote at the end. And I owe one to every kid like him who's ever heard those 3 words said about them. By 10 that morning, the hashtag Brandon Lawson was trending in 43 countries. By 11, a second hashtag had pulled even with it. Hashtag Apologize Vanessa. Vanessa Ashford could not apologize. She had built 22 years of television on never being wrong. So she did the other thing. The official broadcast version of the audition ran that night at 8 p.m. Eastern, edited under the direct supervision of Ellis Granger, on the express written instruction of Vanessa Ashford. A laugh track was laid over the entire 90 seconds of Brandon's verse, not just the opening. The 3 seconds of silence after the punchline were cut entirely. The frame of Vanessa's mouth moving with no sound coming out was cut. The 70% of the standing ovation was cut. Reaction shots of 3 different audience members crying with what looked like pity, not awe, were spliced in. And the tweets from Trevor and Whitney posted that morning were nowhere mentioned in the network's evening recap. The story the broadcast version told was simple. Sad little boy with a lisp. Audience touched by sympathy. Generous judge gives him a chance out of kindness. That afternoon, Vanessa went on a podcast hosted by a friend of hers, a former record executive, and said the words she had been preparing all morning. I couldn't speak in that moment because my heart was breaking for the child. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Putting a 9-year-old on a national stage who isn't ready is a form of exploitation. I voted yes out of compassion. I do not believe he should advance. In a hospital room at Cooper University Hospital, Hattie Lawson lay on her side under a thin blanket, an IV taped to her right hand, and watched the podcast on Tasha's phone with the volume low. When it ended, she pressed pause. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she opened them and looked at her grandson sitting in the chair beside her bed. Baby, she said, when somebody twists your story, you don't fight to untwist their lie. You just tell yours louder. One time. That's all it takes. Tasha was already unzipping the small bag at her feet. She pulled out a USB drive, the same one she had told him about on audition day, and she set it on the hospital tray between them. On it was the raw, unedited audio from the soundboard, the wide-angle stage video, the 3 seconds of silence, the standing ovation in full, the pull quote from both Trevor's and Whitney's tweets, everything Vanessa had cut. Brandon looked at his grandmother. Hattie nodded. That afternoon, Tasha uploaded a single video to her own YouTube account with one caption, dictated by a 9-year-old in a hospital chair. This is what really happened. B. 4 million views in 36 hours. By the second day, a single freeze frame of the audience sitting in complete silence had become a wallpaper, a meme, a Twitter banner. They were calling it the silent room. And in the front row of that freeze frame, standing on his chair with his hands above his head, was a 7-year-old boy named Mason, whose mother would tweet that same week, "My son learned more about kindness in 90 seconds than in a year of school." The story turned. In a studio in Midtown Manhattan, a 51-year-old man named Calvin Hayes watched the raw audio video for the 3rd time in a row. He had 4 Grammys on the shelf behind him. He had produced records for some of the biggest names in hip-hop for 31 years. He had a 9-year-old grandson at home. He turned off the monitor. He sat on the leather couch in his control room for 20 silent minutes. Then he picked up his phone, switched the front camera on, and recorded a single 30-second clip from his couch. "I've been making records for 31 years, he said into the phone. What that boy did in 90 seconds, I've heard maybe a handful of rappers in my entire life pull off. And he's 9. 9. Trevor apologized. Whitney apologized. Vanessa, you're the only one who hasn't, and the whole country is waiting. Sit down. He posted it from the verified account that bore his name and the logo of his label, Silver Pen Records, a small silver fountain pen on a black square. In Brandon's audition verse, the line had been there from the start, hidden in plain sight. Tell the man with the silver pen, a flaw can flip into a flow. Most people had heard it. Almost no one had understood it. Now they did. Brandon Lawson had been listening to Calvin Hayes' record since he was 7 years old. The shout-out had been a flare, fired up into a sky he hoped someone would see. Calvin Hayes had been watching from seat C14 the whole time. The 30-second clip cleared 12 million views in a day. 3 other major artists boosted it within an hour. A culture writer at the New York Times picked up the phone and started calling sources. The hashtag #LetBrandonRap rose alongside hashtag #ApologizeVanessa and held the #1 trending spot on American Twitter for 48 hours straight. The quarterfinal was 8 days away. Vanessa Ashford was still the head judge of Spotlight Nation. The network, under pressure from sponsors and from the culture, could not disqualify Brandon. But Vanessa and Ellis were not finished. They were already in a small conference room on the 20th floor, drawing up a plan to make sure no second verse would ever air. 2 days before the quarterfinal, the official Spotlight Nation social media accounts posted a press release titled, "Format Refresh for an Exciting New Round." The press release announced that all quarterfinal contestants would now be required to perform a cover of a song selected from a network-approved songbook. No original material would be permitted in the quarterfinal round. The release framed this as a measure of fairness, a level playing field that would let the audience judge each contestant on technique alone. Buried in paragraph 6 was a single sentence about how the judges would weigh diction and clarity heavily in the new format. The message landed. Strip the boy of his lyrics, and the boy who is a writer first cannot be a writer. Force him onto a melodic standard, and the lisp becomes a liability instead of a signature. Make diction a stated criterion, and you have given Vanessa a sentence she can hide behind when she votes no. Vanessa had a deeper reason than that, and she said it out loud in a closed-door meeting on the 20th floor that she did not know was being recorded. The meeting was attended by Ellis Granger and 2 senior producers. Tasha Williams, who had been promoted to audio coordinator for the quarterfinal that very week, had left her recorder running by accident, taped to the underside of her tablet bag, which was sitting on the chair behind her boss's chair when she stepped out to take a phone call. What the recorder captured, time-stamped at 3:46 in the afternoon, was Vanessa's voice, calm and clear. I need Trevor and Whitney back. If the boy loses the cover round, the 2 of them are going to look like idiots in public for apologizing to him. They'll have no choice but to vote no. I get my judge's table back. End of story. It was not about Brandon. It was about the 2 colleagues who had dared to apologize without checking with her first. That same night, Hattie Lawson's white cell count dropped below the threshold the doctors had marked on the whiteboard in her room. She was admitted to the ICU at Cooper University Hospital with a bag of platelets running into her left hand and a low-grade fever they could not break. Brandon stood at her bedside in the dark, the cassette recorder against his chest, and almost told her he was pulling out of the show. Hattie was almost asleep. She found his hand without opening her eyes. You don't pull out of nothing, baby, she said. Her voice was a paper-thin whisper. You go up there. I'm not dying tonight. I'm waiting for you to win. He stayed by her bed until the nurses made him leave at 1 in the morning. In the parking garage at the hospital, Tasha was waiting for him by her car. She handed him a single manila folder. Inside were printed screenshots of 2 months of Slack messages between Ellis and Vanessa, a stack of internal emails about the comedy block, and a transcript of the closed-door meeting at 3:46. The phrase, "limits originality," was highlighted in yellow. The phrase, "I get my judge's table back," was highlighted in pink. Brandon looked at the folder. He did not say, "Let's go public." He did not even look surprised. "Not yet," he said. "Not yet," Tasha agreed. They both understood. The folder was a weapon, and you do not use a weapon on the morning before the fight. You use it when the room is full and the cameras are running and there is no exit. He chose his cover song that night, sitting in the chair next to his grandmother's hospital bed while she slept. He chose "The Change Is Gonna Come" by Sam Cooke, a song about a man who was tired and a country that was slow, a song about a black voice asking the world very quietly to let it in. When Ellis heard the choice the next morning, he laughed out loud in the producer's bullpen and said to Vanessa, "Let's see a lisping 9-year-old cover Sam Cooke. This is gift-wrapped." Vanessa smiled. Neither of them knew that, at that exact moment, a 51-year-old man named Calvin Hayes was boarding a flight from JFK to Philadelphia with a single overnight bag, a notebook, and a key on a small silver pen keychain in his pocket. Calvin Hayes did not fly Brandon to him. He flew himself to Camden. He took a cab from the airport to Federal Street and walked up the same stained staircase Brandon climbed every day after school. Hattie Lawson, just home from the ICU on a 48-hour conditional discharge, opened the door in her housecoat. She did not recognize him for a half-second. Then she did. She put her hand to her chest and laughed, soft and surprised, and she stepped aside and let him in. Calvin sat on the same old sofa that had been in that apartment since 1998. Hattie poured him a cup of tea from a chipped pot. He drank all of it. He told her, in the kitchen, with the magnet shaped like Jesus still holding down the bills, that her grandson had the rarest thing he had heard in 3 decades, and that he was going to do everything in his power to make sure the people who tried to bury that gift did not succeed. Then he turned to Brandon and said, "You don't cover Sam Cooke. You interpret him. The cover round is a trap if you cover. It is a coronation if you interpret." They worked for 2 days and 3 nights in a small rented rehearsal space 3 blocks from the apartment. Calvin reharmonized "A Change Is Gonna Come" until it sat half-sung and half-rapped. He wrote into the arrangement a 16-bar original interlude, technically permissible under the rule book as an instrumental break and artistic transition, which his label's attorney had confirmed in writing. Calvin taught Brandon breath support exercises tuned to a 9-year-old chest. He taught him how the lisp could become a color, not a flaw, when it was placed inside the right phrase. On the second day, a 56-year-old speech-language pathologist named Dr. Lillian Carver flew in from New York University on her own dime. She had seen the audition video and could not stop thinking about it. She did not offer to fix anything. She offered to give Brandon more colors. She showed him diaphragm work, resonance shaping, the way to land a sibilant on a beat without losing the breath. Brandon learned in 2 hours what took most adults 2 months. On the 3rd afternoon, Whitney Brooks took an Amtrak from New York to Philadelphia and a Lyft from Philadelphia to a small coffee shop in Camden. She did not want to be seen meeting him in New York. She sat across from Brandon with both hands wrapped around a mug she did not drink. "Brandon," she said, "I laughed at you. A single tweet doesn't fix that. But I can stand next to you at the next round. And there is something I need to tell you about Vanessa and me, something from 2008. But I am going to save it for the night, when it can do the most good. Will you trust me until then?" He nodded. That evening, Trevor Hollis posted publicly, "Watching #SpotlightNation this week with renewed humility." No qualifier, no PR phrasing, just a sentence and his real name on it. Tasha Williams became the thing Brandon did not have. Not a love interest, not a sister by blood, but the older girl who showed up with hot soup at the apartment after Hattie went back to the ICU, who quizzed him on his fourth-grade spelling words on the rehearsal breaks, who slept on the couch in the apartment 2 nights running so he wouldn't wake up alone. On day 4, a 40-second video came in through Tasha's phone from a 9-year-old girl named Haley Brooks in Atlanta who had a stutter and had never told her mother she wanted to sing because she was afraid everyone would laugh. "Brandon," she said into the camera, slow and careful, the way she had probably practiced 50 times. "I sing every day now. Thank you." Brandon watched it 3 times. He saved it. He said quietly to Tasha, "When this is over, I want to meet her." The night before the quarterfinal, he sat in the chair beside his grandmother's bed in the ICU. She was sleeping, the oxygen line whispering. He took out the cassette recorder, pressed record, and held the small black microphone close to his own mouth. "Mama," he said, "tomorrow I'm going to sing for Grandma. You're out there somewhere. Listen for me." He clicked stop. He kissed Hattie on the forehead. The quarterfinal stage of Spotlight Nation was lit blue and silver. 14 million people had tuned in live, the highest rating in the show's 7 seasons. Brandon walked out in a plain white shirt his grandmother had pressed for him 3 days earlier, the cassette in his breast pocket. On a tablet propped against a pillow in Cooper University Hospital, Hattie Lawson, 4 hours out of ICU, watched her grandson take his mark on a stage 200 miles away. The arrangement opened soft, a single piano chord. Brandon sang the first verse of "A Change Is Gonna Come," almost a cappella, pitched in the register Dr. Carver had given him, every consonant landing where Calvin had placed it. His lisp did not disappear. It became a texture, a small wind on the surface of the melody, the same way Sam Cooke's vibrato had once been a small fire under his. At the bridge, the piano dropped. The beat lifted underneath it, slow and reverent, and Brandon went into the 16-bar interlude Calvin had written for him. It was a verse about a man named Sam who got shot in the chest at 33 years old for the crime of refusing to make himself smaller. It was a verse about a country that had been promised change for so long the word had almost gone gray. Brandon delivered it the way Calvin had taught him, breath low, every sibilant placed like a snare. Then the melody came back, and the song closed not with one voice, but with 2. Brandon's live vocal layered against a harmony track Calvin had recorded with him 3 days earlier, so it sounded like a 9-year-old boy and the shadow of a 9-year-old boy were singing to each other across a small distance. The last note held. The room rose. Trevor Hollis stood first. Whitney Brooks stood second. The audience came up behind them like a slow tide. Vanessa Ashford did not stand. Jordan Pierce stepped out to the judges' table. "Vanessa?" She had her speech ready. She had rehearsed it for 2 days. She leaned into the mic with the small, sad expression of a woman about to deliver hard truth. "Brandon," she said, "that was lovely. Truly. But I have to question whether that interlude was really in the spirit of the round. To me, it felt like a workaround, a clever cheat. I'm sorry." Brandon did not answer. He did not have to. A voice came from the upper balcony, calm and deep and known to anyone who had touched a microphone in the last 30 years. "Let me answer that for the boy, Vanessa." Calvin Hayes stood up out of seat C14, the seat Brandon's eyes had flicked to in the middle of his audition verse 6 months earlier. He came down the carpeted steps of the balcony slowly, in no hurry, wearing the same black blazer he had worn to the audition he was never supposed to have attended. By the time he reached the floor, the audience had gone silent again. He walked to center stage and put his hand on Brandon's shoulder. "Jordan," he said, "before the judges vote, may I have 1 minute? There is something 14 million people watching tonight deserve to see. Jordan Pierce nodded. He had been briefed that afternoon by Calvin and Whitney in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the studio. The screen behind the judge's desk came alive. Slack messages, timestamped. Comedy angle on Lawson. Keep it alive through semis if he survives. Internal emails from Ellis to a producer. Find a format change that limits originality. And then, in the bottom right corner, an audio file with a waveform that played out across the screen. Vanessa Ashford's own voice, time-stamped 3:46 p.m., 8 days ago, on the 20th floor. I need Trevor and Whitney back. If the boy loses the cover round, the 2 of them are going to look like idiots in public for apologizing to him. I get my judge's table back. End of story. The audience gasped audibly. Somebody in the booth panicked and killed Vanessa's microphone. Trevor Hollis stood up at the judge's table and leaned into his own. Turn her mic back on. Let her answer. The mic came back. Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She closed it. She opened it again. The second time in her 22-year career on national television, Vanessa Ashford could not find a single word. Both times had been on this stage. Both times had been because of this child. Whitney Brooks pulled her own microphone close. Her voice was even, almost quiet. In 2008, Vanessa told my manager that my southern accent needed to be fixed before any major label would sign me. The exact phrase she used was, "Bless her heart, but she'll never sell." I spent 2 years in elocution lessons that nearly destroyed my speaking voice. I never told anyone. And when Brandon walked out 3 weeks ago, I heard myself say those same 3 words about him. I became her. Tonight, I am not her anymore. Trevor Hollis was next. He did not look at Vanessa. He looked at the camera. I laughed at this child because Ellis Granger told me to. I chose my paycheck over my conscience that day. I won't make that choice again. Calvin Hayes turned to the audience and to the lens. Spotlight Nation and every network watching tonight. You have a choice. Reward the talent, or lose the trust of every artist watching this broadcast. We are watching. All of us. The vote came. Trevor pressed yes. Whitney pressed yes. Vanessa Ashford looked at her button for 9 full seconds. She stood up. She took the in-ear monitor out of her ear and laid it flat on the table. She walked off the stage. She did not look back. Brandon reached up and took Calvin's hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "my grandma's watching." Calvin bent down and put both arms around him. 500 people stood for the second time that night. Within 48 hours, Vanessa Ashford had stepped down from Spotlight Nation for personal reasons. The network never said her name in a press release again. Ellis Granger was terminated the following Monday. A third-party audit of the show's editing practices was announced by the end of the week. Trevor Hollis and Whitney Brooks remained on the panel under the condition that both complete a 6-month implicit bias training program of their own choosing, a condition they accepted publicly. 2 weeks later, the semifinal aired. Brandon performed an original song he had written at the foot of his grandmother's ICU bed on a folded napkin Tasha had smoothed flat for him, titled Inside Voice. He won the audience vote by the widest margin in the show's history. The finale was 4 weeks after that. Hattie Lawson had been discharged from the hospital 2 days earlier. She walked into the studio on her own 2 feet, slowly, with Tasha at her elbow, and took her seat in the front row of the audience for the first time. She wore a deep red dress. Her hair was just beginning to grow back. She did not let go of her purse the entire show. Brandon performed Inside Voice in full for the live finale. Calvin Hayes joined him on the second chorus, the silver pen logo embroidered on the lapel of his jacket. The last line of the song the one Brandon had written sitting alone in the chair beside his grandmother's bed at 3 in the morning, came out clean and small and true. Inside voice for an outside world. Mama said it loud. I just heard.
The entire studio audience stood. So did Trevor. So did Whitney. So did everyone watching at home, from what their tweets said afterward, on couches and kitchen floors and hospital break rooms all over the country. Brandon Lawson, 9 years old, won Spotlight Nation Junior Division. The prize was $250,000. Calvin Hayes set up a trust the next morning. Every dollar of the prize money, plus every cent of the streaming royalties on Inside Voice that began landing in the first week and never stopped, was locked away until Brandon turned 18. Silver Pen Records separately covered every dollar of Hattie Lawson's outstanding medical bills, the chemo, the ICU stays, the surgeries to come. The label's medical director quietly offered to fund corrective surgery for Brandon's tongue tie. He thought about it for 2 days. He said no. I want to keep my voice the way it is, he told Calvin in the kitchen at Federal Street, a glass of milk in his hand. It's the voice my mama left me. Calvin nodded. Understood, little brother. Hattie's next round of scans came back in remission. Inside Voice went gold in 4 months. Brandon went back to 4th grade in Camden and missed only 2 days of school the entire spring, once to accept his gold record on television, and once because he had a cold. Haley Brooks, the 9-year-old girl in Atlanta with the stutter, flew up to Camden in May. She and Brandon sat on the front stoop of the Federal Street building and rapped together a short song he had written for the two of them, called Two Tongues. Tasha filmed it on her phone. It went up a week later. Haley's mother told a reporter that her daughter had not asked her to stop her speech therapy. She had asked for the first time to start it. Dr. Lillian Carver, with seed money from Silver Pen, founded a small nonprofit later that summer focused on supporting children whose voices fell outside what schools and stages and casting agents had been trained to accept. The mission statement, written by Dr. Carver and Brandon together, was a single sentence. We do not fix children. We give them more colors. Tasha Williams signed a producer development deal with Silver Pen Records. She kept her phone number the same. Brandon visited his old elementary school in June. Mrs. Donovan, his 4th grade teacher, stood up in front of her current class with her eyes red and apologized to him. He shook her hand. He did not say much. The boy in the back row of that classroom, the one with a slight stutter who had been sitting alone at lunch, looked up from his book and watched. At a signing event a month later, a 7-year-old boy named Mason worked his way to the front of the line with his mother and a small notebook. Brandon recognized him immediately. They took a picture. Brandon signed the notebook for the first kid who stood up. In a composition notebook under his bed, in the same apartment on Federal Street, a sentence Brandon had written in pencil 2 years before the audition was now underlined twice. They always laugh first. Mama said make the laugh come last. The laugh had come last. 6 months after the finale, Brandon Lawson stepped backstage at Madison Square Garden's junior stage for the first sold-out show of his life. 18,000 people were in the building. He was 9 years old. He stood in the wings in a clean black shirt his grandmother had ironed for him that morning, the same cassette recorder in the same breast pocket. He took it out. He pressed play. He listened, for one beat, to a voice he had been carrying with him since he was 5 years old. Mama loves you, Brandon, always. Even when I'm not there. He smiled. He clicked it off. He slid it back into his pocket. Across the wings, his grandmother stood with one hand on the curtain. Her hair had grown back almost to her shoulders. She wore the deep red dress. She lifted her thumb, just slightly, the same way she had lifted it in the wings of the Spotlight Nation audition stage a lifetime ago. She did not have to say a word. Brandon walked toward the lights. Have you ever stood in a room of 500 people and been the only person not laughing? Sometimes the moment you stand alone is the exact moment the world is about to remember why it ever needed your voice. Sometimes the voice they laugh at hardest is the voice the world has been waiting longest to hear. If it had been you standing under those first lights, alone, with 500 people laughing at the way you spoke, would you have walked off? Or would you have stayed? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And there is one detail at minute 418 of this video that only sharp eyes will catch. Look for the boy named Mason in the front row, the first one on his feet. Tell me what you see. If this story gave you something tonight, hit like, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Next week, I have a story that is going to wreck you in the best possible way. I will see you there.